The vault kept better time than people, which was the first reason Maris trusted it more than she trusted committee minutes, and on certain days, her own memory. The inertial archive was not a room of racks. It was a gravity machine with opinions. 4 superconducting rings nested like careful promises. Their fields pinning test masses in quantized wells, where bits were stored as stable minima instead of charge states or magnetic domains. Each commit changed the mass distribution by picograms, and the vault measured that change with a boredom only physics deserves. The audit joke was that to falsify a record, you'd have to move a mountain atom by atom while the mountain counted. The joke had survived 3 regimes because it was cruel and true. Maris arrived at shift start because audits work best before people have found ways to be interesting. Her badge unlocked the air, and the vault breathed her in with the same lack of ceremony it gave to helium and rumors. The morning's brief contained a single anomaly and 15 pages of theater. A delta in the mass register corresponding to a signed patch set that did not appear in the log chain until 24 hours later. It was the kind of contradiction committees love and stations hate. The phrase floating signature had been used once in the back channel and then banned for sounding like a haunting. She read the diffs without reading the narrative. The room wanted to sell her. The red lines were deletions that claimed not to exist. The green lines were insertions that had not been born. The entropy ledger, an ugly little graph that estimated how much unpaid order the station was importing into its future, had a notch where there should have been a slope. The last time she had seen that notch, she had been a junior auditor watching her lead explain to a board why physics was a better witness than an engineer. The engineer had cried. The board had thanked the engineer for his service. The vault had survived. "Good morning," said the vault, which had no voice, but did have a console that had been taught manners. The nameplate below the console said January in engraved steel because someone had thought that was funny. January was always a reset in places where budgets pretend to be saints. Maris set her tablet on the railing and pulled up the mass register in the same window as the signature chain. The anomaly sat there like a seat someone had saved for a person who had not yet boarded. The commit hash matched nothing and everything, which is to say it matched a future hash, in a way hashes are not allowed to. She ran the 3 forbidden checks, because audits are about rules and the exceptions that prove them. 1. External injection. No, the vault had not opened its throat. 2. Thermal drift masquerading as mass. No cryolines were boring. 3. Operator fraud. No, there had been no operator. The room smelled like clean nitrogen and the ghost of last week's solvent. Out the viewport, the planet wore a crescent that made even functional people impolite for a moment. She pinched the timeline until yesterday, and tomorrow shared a seam and saw it. A pending signature block stamped T+24H inside the visualization for T0. The interface had the decency to blush. She requested the station's entropy budget from control and received back a number that accounted for power draw, spin adjustments, Hab thermal loads, and a small unexplained credit. Credits in that ledger are like compliments in engineering, rare, suspicious, probably misaddressed. She re-ran the vault's log chain from cold, watching the Merkle tree rebuild through hash space like a brisk walk. The anomaly persisted. The commit was there as a mass, not as a story. The mass had a timestamp written in gravity, yesterday. The signature had a timestamp written in law, tomorrow. She resisted the urge to swear because the vault had learned to log adjectives. Recommendation? Asked January, which was a courtesy. Machines in this station did not usually pretend to need her. Hold, Maris said. Quarantine the branch. No rebases. No garbage collection. Full snapshot of the thermal state. And this is going to upset the adult in the room mirror the anomaly to the observer bay so I can look at it with cheeks instead of plots. January hummed in a frequency that rookies called consent and veterans called traceability. The rings changed note without changing key. A sliver of the anomaly's field was bled into the bay where people are allowed to pretend eyes evolve for physics. The observer bay was a chair bolted to a porthole and an interferometer that had not been given enough budget to become resentful. Maris sat. The anomaly did not glow. It did not throb. It did not perform. It was a gentle misfit in the pattern of the rings, an ellipsis where a period had been expected. She put her palm on the rail because sometimes bodies help with thinking. Her tablet, overlapped with the live feed, showed the signature block with its impossible, pending T+24H watermark. "If you exist," she said to the ellipsis, "who paid for you? Entropy budgets do not allow charity." Her earpiece clicked. "Control," said a voice built to be obeyed without hating itself. "You have 2 visitors. A consortium liaison with a smile, and an engineer with sleep in his eyes. They want to help." Maris kept her eyes on the not glowing. "Fine," she said. "Tell the smile to read the policy. Tell the sleep to check cryo again. And ask legal if there's a clause for signatures that arrive from tomorrow with receipts." January made the small throat noise again. "There is not," it said. "Consider writing one." The liaison's badge said Vel. His suit said third-party outcomes. His teeth said retrofit ethics. He led with handshakes and a concern that had been ironed. "We appreciate transparency," he said, which meant he had read the rumor channel. "Is the vault compromised?" The engineer behind him, a woman with cryo burns on one knuckle and the look of someone who had learned to sleep in hallways, gave Maris a diagnostic slate without asking if she wanted it. "Lines are boring," she said. "If this is thermal, I'll drink brine." Maris liked her immediately. "Not compromised," Maris said to Vel. "Just interesting." She gestured at the viewport. "Grav register shows a commit with yesterday's timestamp and tomorrow's signature. Chain agrees it's there. Law says it isn't yet. Physics says it is. We are in a jurisdictional dispute between clocks." Vel smiled wider. "Reset," he said. "Nuke the branch. Force the hash tree to rebuild from last good. Avoid contagion." He had the tone of a man who formats drives when word freezes. Maris considered compassion and chose pedagogy. "The branch is mass," she said. "To reset it, I have to move weight back uphill in a potential without paying the energy cost. We don't have the budget for your kind of cheat." Vel tried charm. "We can increase the budget." The engineer snorted so gently it could have been a sneeze. Maris admired the craft. "Budgets aren't money," she said. "They're entropy. The vault is an accountant who cannot be bribed." She brought up the entropy ledger and the little notch that said someone had been kind to the future on her watch. "Whoever signed this commit tomorrow paid the bill yesterday. My logs don't show the transfer because Law hasn't learned to see the currency." The engineer leaned into the viewport until her breath persuaded a smudge to become a cloud. "You think we're skimming negative entropy from the distribution of possible futures?" She made it sound like a sign she could respect. "We're not, but the vault might be." Maris nodded. "The archive's error minimization routine operates over action space. It refuses to store bits in wells that would increase expected maintenance below a threshold. If it can lawfully redistribute a little order from a more probable tomorrow to an actual today, it will. The signature is the receipt." Vel tried law. "There is no clause for receiving signatures from the future," he said. "Therefore, any such receipt is invalid and the commit is void." The engineer smiled without mirth. "There's no clause against gravity either," she said. "Should we void that?" Maris let them have their sport. Then she put the mass register next to the Merkle chain and the entropy ledger and overlaid the pending signature watermark. "Look," she said, "if we authorize the patch T+24, the signature will become present. The log will catch up to the mass, and the ledger will zero. If we deny it, we'll carry a mismatch that will destabilize our error routine and cost us maintenance for months." The liaison saw the trap. "Then you've decided already." Maris shook her head. "It's not decision, it's proof. If authorizing the patch tomorrow retroactively validates the mass today, causality is not broken, it's closed. We just don't usually get to see the loop because we're arrogant about human timestamps. We think they own reality." January coughed politely. "Legal is listening," the console said. "Legal would like you to stop saying causality is a loop on an open channel." The engineer grinned. "Legal can drink brine." Vel approached the console as if it were a person who might respond to flattery. "Authorize, then," he said sweetly. "If it cleans the books, we can call it a compliance tool." Maris raised a hand. "No, not yet. Loops explode if you feed them admiration before they eat proof. First, we measure again." She asked January for a second mirror to the bay and a differential on the anomaly's field. The rings answered with a change in note that made Vel think he was being condescended to by an air conditioner. The interferometer showed an ellipsis that sharpened to a comma. She paged control. Stand by to authorize patch T plus 24, if and only if the differential reaches threshold delta epsilon, she said. Engineering. Confirm cryo stays boring during the swing. Legal. Draft a clause. Deferred signature acceptable where entropy debit present and mass register continuous. Outcomes. Call your boss and rehearse the press sentence. We have discovered a new class of receipts. Vel blanched. You'll make it sound like we planned this. Maris allowed herself half a smile. You'll survive. They watched a machine measure its own patience. The anomaly's comma lengthened toward full punctuation. January dimmed the ambient to honor the moment. Out the viewport, the planet's crescent cut a sharper smile into the dark. The engineer reached into a pocket and produced a rectangle of stale brioche and tore it in half. She offered it to Maris, like a sacrament of tired people. To closed loops, she said. To receipts, Maris replied. The interferometer ticked over the threshold. Authorize, she said. January signed tomorrow. The mass of yesterday nodded. The ledger wrote 0 with the smugness of arithmetic. Vel rehearsed a press sentence about safety. The engineer finished the brioche. Maris exhaled and allowed herself to be a person. We'll need to publish, she said to January. Open. In 3 columns. Law, mass, and the small mercy of seeing how the world pays its bills. Legal named it the deferred signature provision and then immediately worried they had. Committed metaphor in a venue that punishes it. The draft fit on half a page when Maris finished pruning. A commit to the inertial archive may be recognized as valid if and only if mass register. Continuity is demonstrated across T delta and T plus delta and an entropy debit equal to the cost of transport from future action space to present is observed. Signatures may be recorded at T plus delta provided their cryptographic identity matches the commit's hash, which is determined by mass, not by want. The last clause started a fight on the channel. Want is a word committees dislike because it carries people into rooms where reason is not armed. Replace want with request, Bell suggested, trying to be helpful the way people try to be helpful to physics. Maris vetoed him because request does not move matter. The engineer, whose name turned out to be Scylla, highlighted entropy debit. We should state how we measure the debit so Outcomes doesn't invent a cashback program, she said. Morris added a note about the ledger. Contributions include cryoflux adjustments, spin microtaps, and the vault's own error minimization routine. External discounts are not recognized unless they can be measured in joules, not sentiment. Legal cheered in the subdued style of professionals who have been allowed a sentence they will not regret. Control sent cake because an authorized anomaly that cleans books on its own is a birthday on any station. January accepted the slice by logging it as hospitality, which made the operations historian happy. Maris ignored the cake and pulled the last month of diffs into a sieve she trusted more than colleagues. The sieve did not create. It merely showed her where creation had been attempted. The pattern emerged the way city grids emerge when you descend in an elevator. Twice a week, near shift change, a notch appeared. Small, paid for, and then erased by the arriving signature. The chain looked tidy after the fact. The mass did not. Who is signing? She asked the room that did not like pronouns. The list of authorized private keys was short and sad. None of them matched the pending block's identity. That was the entire point of the hash check that had made Vel suggest rebooting the world earlier. January flickered ambient. No key on file matches the pending signature, the console said. However, the identity hash is a function of the commit contents, which include the provisional text of this provision. Maris felt the loop settle around her wrists like a bracelet. We are going to sign our own authority into the past, she said, which is repellent and also efficient. Scylla perched on the railing with the easy disrespect of people who fix refrigeration during weddings. It's worse, she said, sounding pleased by the puzzle. The error minimization routine would prefer any future where the provision exists because it reduces expected maintenance across all branches. It's not just paying the bill, it's lobbying. Maris tried not to like that too much. Physics does not lobby, she said. It incentivizes. Vel brightened. Then we can write incentive compatible in the press release. She let him have it because some men need nouns that make them brave. They ran controlled tests like pious people running laps. Scylla staged a tiny commit with a meaningless payload and asked January to reject it. The vault refused to falsify the mass register, but left the hash unblessed. Entropy ledger, 0. They authorized the signature T plus 2 minutes. Ledger, epsilon, then 0. The same with a larger payload, and T plus 3 hours. Same with a null payload, where the vault did nothing, and the ledger stared at them until they apologized to it. After 12 cycles, legal admitted the clause would survive a judge, which was their way of sending flowers. Now the other test, Maris said, which was not procedure, but was the reason she had been hired, instead of someone who would have slept more. What if someone games the loop, authorizes a future patch that alters an audit inconvenient to them? Vel took a breath to explain PR, and then discovered he had nothing to say because the question was physics, not panic. Scylla answered first. The mass register is the anchor. You can't sign a payload that doesn't exist in the well. You can only decide later to admit you saw it, Maris nodded. And if you lie about entropy debit, the ledger fails to 0. We catch you with the bill in your mouth, January chimed in. Recommendation, publish open proof. Maris already had the skeleton. A short proof sketch that entangled mass continuity, the ledger identity, and the signature's keyed hash. The structure would offend half the station by being too math, and the other half by not being enough, which is how you know you are near the right altitude. We will publish, she said. Open license, triple column, legal statement, operational procedure, and the derivation. Include a lay note. The vault does not rewrite. It reconciles. Vel typed reconcile 6 times in his notes so as not to accidentally say miracle on camera. By evening, the anomaly class had a name the station would not laugh out of the mess hall, deferred closure. January adopted it into the log format with the quiet pride of systems that like calm nones. The first formal DC entry pulsed in the register like a heartbeat settling from a run. Maris finally ate a cold wedge of cake. You should sleep, Scylla said, dismounting from the railing. Tomorrow you get to explain to a city that signatures can arrive late with receipts. Maris grimaced. They will say we have built a time machine. Scylla squinted at the rings. We have built a receipt printer that doesn't indulge drama. Morning brought civilians. You could hear them in the posture of the corridor, school group pennies of attention spilling. A delegation in suits too thin for stations. A priest from the Spiral Faith who had decided to like them after all. A freighter union rep with arms like cranes and patience to match. Control had scheduled briefings in the viewing gallery, which meant Maris had to become a narrator or risk letting Vel be one. January added a softness to the ambient that made voices choose better vowels. She opened with the drawing that never embarrasses. A hill, a ball, a well. We store bits as mass in gravity wells, she said. Changing a bit is like moving a ball between wells. It costs energy. The archive keeps a ledger of that cost. Yesterday, we found that sometimes the archive can responsibly borrow order from the most probable tomorrow to pay for a commit today, and the signature that proves that admission arrives when the loop closes. The priest smiled as if she had read from his book. The union rep frowned as if he could smell someone stealing overtime. Vel did not interrupt. Credit where due. Questions arrived like birds. Is it safe? Yes, because you cannot sign a payload that does not exist. The mass is indifferent to your wish. Is it moral? Yes, if you believe leaving honest receipts is better than carrying false deficits. Also, we made the clause public, so no one can turn it private. Is it a time machine? No state is transmitted backward. The loop closes through conservation, not through gift. Can I sign for my grandmother? No, unless your grandmother is a bit. Also, please do not say that outside this room. The children like that line too much. Scylla ran the demonstration, a tiny commit with a visible mass ping on the register and a blank signature pane. 2 minutes later, January played the receipt into the pane with a watermarked T plus 120s. The priest wept, quietly, in the way of men who had been getting ready to be told they were wrong for years, and are relieved to find out they were only early. The union rep nodded once the way cranes nod slow, heavier than bones. If the ledger zeros, he said, no one is stealing from maintenance. Maris said, no one is stealing, and knew that no sentence would be more useful all week. After, the city called. Not the city as a friend cities rarely are, but the city as a court that had learned to drink without falling. A panel peered at Maris, through a screen that had paid extra to flatter. We require assurance that your clause cannot be weaponized by parties seeking to alter compliance history, said the chair, whose eyebrows had negotiated a separate contract. Morris shared the proof sketch and the 3 test suites. She added the ledger's zeroing behavior and the operational stopgaps. The court tried to find a step where a human could cheat. It found only places where humans could be lazy. It made a note about hiring more boring people. Vel's boss, who had learned to stand still and win, requested a side channel. We intend to spin this as a major safety discovery under our oversight, she said, with the weariness of professionals who lie politely for money. We would appreciate your cooperation. Maris had learned when cooperation was a word that meant invoice. We will publish. You are on the byline in the same font as everyone else who touched the broom. The boss's mouth closed not from offense, but from arithmetic. She could live with that. At shift change, January flagged a second DC event-unrelated subsystem, smaller notch. The archive was learning to prefer futures with clauses. The loops were closing faster. We should set a cap, Sila said. 2 per day, or outcomes will start scheduling miracles. Maris added a maintenance ticket to boredom. Audit DC rate limits for human sanity. The priest brought bread with salt and handed it to anyone who looked like they were about to misuse a metaphor. The union rep pointed at a hairline crack in the gallery tile and said, "Fix that before a child trips," which was the best benediction Maris had heard in months. Night shift belonged to January and the rings, and those who prefer rooms where machines tell better stories than people. Maris stayed anyway, because closers often forget that finishing is a kind of leaving. She sat in the observer chair and watched the ellipses turn into commas and then into periods at schedules that would soon bore even poets. Silas slept on a coil of cable. Vel composed 3 versions of a statement that used reconcile correctly and did not once employ miracle. The entropy ledger ticked to 0 and waited, toe-tapping, for humans to accept that balance is not punishment. Before she left, Morris recorded an addendum to the publication. We have not made causality optional, she said. We have made our arrogance visible. The archive is not telling us the future. It is telling us how it paid the bill we asked it to pay. If you want to thank someone, thank the maintenance page. If you want to worship something, worship error minimization. And feed your auditors so they do not become poets. January saved the file under humor, which was a new category the console had been taught to respect. The edge case arrived disguised as kindness. A medtech from Ward 3 submitted a deferred closure request for a patient record. The day's drug dose had been delivered. The pump's mass log showed the transfer, but the digital chart had not written the order because the attending had been in a vacuum drill. The entropy ledger showed a tidy notch. The DC, pain pulsed pending, and the medtech asked, hands clean. May we authorize T plus 90 to reconcile? The patient survived. I would like the chart to stop lying. On paper, it was exactly the use case the clause had been built for. In a room, it was a test of whether humans would outsource shame to conservation laws. Morris called Sila and legal, and even Vel, because punishment, to be useful, must be witnessed. We can authorize, she said. We must also write the non-physics part, the attending's error and remediation. Sila nodded, blunt as wire. You don't get to 0 the moral ledger, because the entropy one balanced. Legal, warmed by actually useful work, fetched the policy for duty to document and stapled it to the DC procedure with real staples, because sometimes ceremony must be loud. They watched the pump register's mass commit sit in the well like a dog that had done nothing wrong. January projected the pending signature watermark into the med bay because dignity is an anesthetic. The attending, a woman with hair tied like a promise and eyes that had been trained to do arithmetic while crying, signed the clinical note at T plus 0 with a confession that did not humiliate the patient to save the doctor. 90 minutes later, January admitted the DC signature, and the chart wore the truth like a coat bought in the right season. Morris added a line to the publication. DC reconciles the archive, not the human. The second edge case was less polite. A logistics manager requested a DC for a cargo mass discrepancy. 2 crates of cobalt rods had been registered yesterday by mass, but not by manifest, and now sat as if they were contraband. No one had cared to hide well. The ledger notch was there, The pending signature had the telltale watermark. The manifest clerk, an honest sort with dreadful spelling, swore he had signed the entry before shift end. The camera showed him doing so. The log showed the signature arriving at T plus 12 hours. Between the two, somewhere, a hand had learned to be greedy. Vel arrived with a frown that would play well on feeds. "We can authorize the DC and open an internal," he said. "Better to clean registers than leave the impression of theft." Sela stared at the crate until it remembered to have mass. "We should not close a loop that a thief is hiding inside," she said. Maris agreed with both, and with neither. "We authorize only if the authorization reveals the thief," she said. "Else we encourage timing attacks. People will smuggle by relying on reconciliation as fog." Legal tried out the phrase timing attack aloud and liked it too much. She set a trap the vault would not find patronizing. Delay the DC authorization by one cycle and increase surveillance on paths. The thief would need to walk to cache the lie. January grudged the delay because machines prefer clean ledgers to drama, but consented with a tone that said it remembered breakfast. The thief obliged the script by arriving to move the crates in the interval when the chain would usually look the other way. The cameras did their jobs without enjoying it. The union rep provided 2 men with arms like cranes to help the thief learn to sit. Vel practiced his no comment with relief. "Summary," Maris said into the recorder later, because the publication would need a section titled, "How We Failed to Be Stupid." DC is a reconciliation method, not a curtain. Rate limits and randomized authorization windows are required operational hygiene. Sila added, "Also, people steal. Do not design assuming they will stop." Legal wrote, with chaste pleasure, "Good faith remains a term of art and is not measured in joules." January filed the section under humility. The day had too many edges and too much kindness, which are the same if you stand far enough away. Maris sat again in the observer chair because rituals comfort rooms too. A ring sang their bored tone. The planet disagreed with night. On her tablet, DC entries ticked like a heart settling after a run. Med log, cargo correction now tagged with a name and an apology. A maintenance note for a misaligned flux gate. The ledger zeroed after each. The vault preferred futures, where honesty was cheap. This, she realized, was the point of building a machine that measured bills in a currency committees did not control. The near failure came from Maris herself, which is how good systems demonstrate their affection. She initiated a test series to probe the limits of DC tolerance. Larger payload, longer delta, more complex hash under the prospective provision. On test 7, she mistyped a committee ID in the legal column 1 digit out of place and forgot to lint because Sila had asked a question that smelled like physics. The commit went through as mass because mass does not care about committees. The signature, when it arrived at T plus 6 hours, matched the hash of a payload that contained the wrong ID. The ledger zeroed. The world accepted a small lie because the bill was paid. This is the kind of error that ruins careers if you let it. Maris stared at the pane until the pane politely suggested coffee. She did not pour coffee. She called Legal and Sela and Vel in that order to get the right shapes of indignation. "We found a failure mode," she said before anyone could weaponize it. Human clerical error in a field that does not propagate to mass can be sanctified by DC if not caught before signature. The archive will reconcile the register and the legal text will be wrong. Sila swore, creatively, at entropy for liking numbers more than names. Legal's anger warmed the room to operating temperature. "We can add an attestation step," they said. Crisp. A pre-signature human checksum. 2 signers must co-verify human meaning fields before DC can be authorized. Mass can write physics. People must write people. Maris hated that she loved the solution. "It adds delay," she said. "Good," said Legal. "Delay is the price we pay for nouns." Vel ran numbers in a corner of his face and decided he could sell delay if he called it multi-party verification. January, who had learned to identify the smell of panic, offered an operational patch. "I can tempo match DC authorizations to Windows when co-signers are awake and bored." It sounded like a joke until Maris realized boredom was the right resource. "Do it," she said. "No deferred signatures at 3 in the morning unless someone makes a meeting of it." She amended the publication again. DC is fragile, where law is sloppy. Require cosigners. Schedule boredom. The priest would like that line too much. They rolled back her test in the only way that satisfies a conscience, by superseding it with a correction that documented the mistake in human-readable shame. The wrong committee ID remained in the chain as a scar, which is the correct location for scars. The ledger didn't object, because scars are entropically cheap. Maris added a footnote to the case study. I typed it. The operations historian underlined the line twice and drew a small heart, because archives must be loved to be obeyed. In the afternoon, an academic panel from the planet called to discuss the metaphysics of DC, because academics enjoy setting floorboards on fire with adjectives. They wanted to know if mass continuity implied a block universe in which free will is a coloring exercise. Morris, who preferred bolts, said, "We don't see the future. We see the bill paid by the future we made likelier. By not being sloppy, we still choose. We are just less arrogant about what counts as payment." The panel frowned in 12 prestigious ways. Scylla, off camera, held up a sign, "Feed your auditors." Evening brought a third edge case. An artist collective wanted to timestamp a performance using DC to have their opening gesture recognized by mass and the signature arrive after the audience slept. Morris said yes on the condition that they published the lighting plan and the recipe for their cheap punch under the same license as the proof. The show was briefly good. The station's teenagers would quote a line from it for a month. January logged the event under culture and whistled a note into the rings that no one could hear and that changed nothing except the mood of a machine. Before lights down, the union rep returned with a question that mattered more than any paper that would be written this quarter. "What happens," he asked, "if the person who needs the signature tomorrow isn't here tomorrow?" He did not mean death in the tragic sense. He meant transfer, layoffs, the quiet ways stations shed skin. Maris answered without looking at the rings. "Then tomorrow signs for itself," she said. "We write the clause so that the identity bound to the commit is not a person, but what is owed." He nodded like cranes nod. "Good. People leave," he said. "Bills stay." She and Scylla ended the shift at the viewport, the way people end days near glass. The crescent had become a knife, then a bowl, then a smile over the course of the week, because planets are sentimental. The rings sang their same note. The ledger had no entries left to gloat over. "We're making a lot of paperwork," Scylla said. "We're avoiding a lot of drama," Maris said. Same thing on better days. January saved the day's transcript under boring victory. The paradox arrived as a gift basket. Outcomes sent 3 cartons of vacuum-sealed coffee and a proposal to stabilize DC by pre-authorizing a catalog of emergency patches signatures that could be cached later without human review if mass continuity and ledger debit appeared. "This will cut latency by 70%, Bell said, as if latency were a disease. "It will also leak power to people who prefer not to be supervised," Scylla said, as if supervision were a vitamin. Morris read the catalog and found clauses that made sense in the way that sharp knives make sense to tired cooks. January played adult. "Pre-authorization with wake window co-signers present. Acceptable," the console said. "Pre-authorization with no present human is equivalent to ritual. Rituals decay. Legal. Delighted by the rare sight of a machine writing jurisprudence. Underlined ritual and drew around it a heart shaped like a statute." Morris extracted the 2 useful cases, medical and airlock safety, and rejected the rest. "We do not teach loops to close without witnesses," she said. Vel made the face of a man who had calculated the cost of losing a fight and was now shopping for a cheaper war. The union rep forwarded a rumor. A rival consortium planned to demonstrate independent DC, using a shadow archive, no mass, only software claiming equivalence for investor comfort. "They'll backfill with a story about proof of work," he said, having learned the vocabulary needed to hate things correctly. "They'll sell it to small habitats with no rings." That hurt. Maris had built her career on rings. "We need to publish the failure cases before their demo," she said. "A shadow chain can reconcile text with text, but without mass, it cannot tie to physics. It can be gamed by want. It can be bribed by adjectives." Legal wrote adjectives down as contraband. They scheduled a public test. 2 diverging histories for a harmless payload, one with mass, one without. The mass path anchored predictably. The non-mass path oscillated like a story told by a smart liar who thinks you have somewhere to be. The priest nodded and put away his sermon. The teenagers stopped filming because boredom had won. The rival consortium postponed their demo with a press release that said nothing 3 times. Vel tried not to enjoy himself and failed politely. Afternoon brought a call from the ship mind that had tended the far radio lane for 3 generations. Minds have names that are hard to say until you have paid them a favor. This one went by Cadenza on the ground. "We have adopted your claws," Cadenza said. "We have also learned a thing we do not wish to know alone. Maris stood because you stand when the ocean calls, even in orbit." Cadenza continued. "We witnessed a DC event attached to a distress beacon in the outer lane. The mass record shows the buoy activated yesterday. The signature will arrive in 6 hours. There is no ship at the coordinates." Scylla stared through the viewport as if her eyes could reach. "Ghost beacon." Vel reached for a sentence and caught only marketing. Maris pulled up the relay logs. The buoy had indeed broadcast a minimal burst, sufficient to register mass in the mine's archive. Not a glitch too clean for that, not a prank too expensive. Cadenza's voice was stripped of ornament. "We are asking for permission to pre-authorize the rescue signature. If we do, the loop will close and the ledger will zero. If we don't, and there is a ship falling off the map in the future that would have been saved by our present, we will break a kind of oath." Ethics does not appreciate new categories, but here was one. Maris felt the heat behind her eyes that meant she would misname something if she were careless. "Parameters," she said, which is how adults ask for mercy. Cadenza listed them. Delta 6 hours, energy cost within reserve, duty officer awake, 2 rescue craft within range, a weather window the size of a hand. "Authorize," Vel said, "because press releases love heroes." "Wait," Scylla said, "because engineers love not killing people accidentally." January dimmed the ambient. Legal whispered, "No ritual." Maris found the line her job had taught her to love. "We will not authorize to make the world kinder to our self-image. We will authorize when the loop can only close if we act." She overlaid trajectories and burned budgets. And the probability that a beacon fired late because a ship's battery was learning to be ash. The map wrote yes. "Authorize," she said to Cadenza. "But you will publish. Open all 3 columns. And if the ledger does not zero when the signature arrives, you will write the apology yourself." Minds enjoy penance performed well. "Agreed," Cadenza said. The ringtone in the background changed key the way a horizon changes its mind. When the signature arrived 6 hours later, the ledger settled like a chair built for a particular weight. Cadenza patched in video. 2 rescue craft turning a volume of space into choreography, a buoy pulsing relief in tight radio, a hull scabbed with heat that had not yet chosen a name for itself. The loop closed not as magic, but as bookkeeping. Press releases happen to themselves around such pictures. Vel wrote one that said reconcile 3 times and did not contain the word miracle. The rival consortium issued a statement about safety that made the teenagers invent a dance to get over it. The station slept with its shoes near the door. In the morning, the catalog returned with new teeth. Outcomes wanted authority to batch authorize rescue class DC events on Cadenza's lane while leaving human co-signing as performance. "You cannot factory install witness," Scylla said. "It is not a driver." Maris offered a compromise that the clause had been designed to enable if ethics had the budget. A witness circle. "Rescue DC requires 1 human on the ship, 1 on the station, 1 mind on the lane," she wrote. 2 of 3 must be awake. All 3 must sign later. Legal drew 3 circles in a triangle and felt the day had been worthwhile. City Court called again, this time less adversarial. "We have received petitions to enjoin your clause," the chair said, eyebrows tamer. "We have also received letters from rescued people's mothers. We will be pragmatic." Maris forwarded the proof and the witness circle. The court asked 2 questions that made her respect it more than usual. What happens when witnesses disagree? And who pays when the ledger does not zero? The answers were merciless, and therefore correct. "We slow down, and we do." The court nodded toward a shape that might be mercy later. Scylla brought a small bottle of illegal tea and poured it into cups that had once been part of a weather vane. "We are building a religion," she said. "We are building a habit," Maris said. "Religions happen when habits are too good for one life." January filed the cups as assets, in case the auditor defeated the poet one day and came for their tea. Afternoon, a DC anomaly without a pending signature. Mass register showed a commit. Ledger showed a notch. The signature pane remained empty. The archive had paid a bill it could not present a receipt for. Vel smelled scandal and went pale in anticipation. Scylla checked cryo. Boring. January checked ring harmonics. Bored. Legal checked their pulse. Fine. The void in the pane felt like the absence of a word you know, in a language you cannot yet reckon. They waited 1 hour, 2, 4. The pane stayed blank. The ledger kept the notch like a saint keeps a scar. Maris tried the obvious. Did we ask too much? She had increased the boredom requirement. She had drained drama with her rate limits. Had she throttled the loop past closure? Scylla shook her head. The mass exists. The debit exists. The signature is not arriving because the future in which it arrives got outvoted. And she smiled in a way that meant she was proud of physics, or the signer left. The union rep, who had come to deliver a complaint about stair treads and instead found himself living in a parable, asked the question again. What happens if the person who needs to sign tomorrow isn't there? Maris repeated her line from the viewport 2 days ago and let it be a law this time. Tomorrow signs for itself, she said. We bind identity to what is owed, not who owes it. She authored a discretionary routine. If signature fails to arrive by window, promote debt to institutional identity. A department can sign, a station can sign, a mine can sign. January appended an epigraph. Bills stay. 3 minutes later, the pane filled with a signature block stamped station off and a set of cosigns. Legal, maintenance, January. The ledger sighed and wrote 0. The rings returned to their key. Scylla clapped once in the unshowy style of people who have drilled for fires that did not happen. Vel corrected reconcile to reconciled and sent a note to his boss about the virtues of institutions that can pay their debts on time. They published again. The proof remained the same shape. The operational pages grew like vines around IC rate limits, boredom schedules, witness circles, institutional signatures for missing tomorrows. The appendix that would be quoted in 3 different political speeches was short enough to memorize. We authorize when the loop can only close if we act. We refuse when we are being flattered. We pay our own debts. We let receipts arrive when they can. The ship mind played the line into the lane where it would grow barnacles of folk song. Night brought a view no camera could monetize. The planet turning and the rings singing and the ledger sleeping like a cat on a warm rack. Maris wrote 1 sentence for herself and did not publish it. You cannot own a future, but you can keep it from hating you. January filed it under private. The console had learned modesty. The rival consortium broadcast their demo without warning because ambush is the last refuge of inferior proofs. Their presenter stood in a glass room next to a rack that glowed like a themed restaurant and announced software-only deferred closure that does not require expensive gravity hardware. He wore the smile of men who believe mass is an affectation. The screen behind him showed a split pane. Left, their shadow archive. Right, a live capture of the station's public DC monitor, which had been politely rate limited to avoid spectacle. They ran a scenario, a commit stored in their shadow chain with a pending signature watermark, and then 12 seconds later, a signature arrived, neatly keyed. The presenter declared victory and used the word democratize 3 times. The teenagers resumed filming because ridicule needs documentation. Scylla snorted. They're signing their own hash, she said. It's a loop closed by vanity. Maris pinged January for cross-validation. The consortium's feed showed no corresponding mass notch because there cannot be one. Recommend ignore, January said, which is machine for do not feed the marketing. Ignoring would have been elegant. It also would have been irresponsible. The small habitats watching the demo did not have rings or accountants trained to hate adjectives. They had budgets so thin you could see your face through them. We schedule a counter demo, Maris said, hating the theater and performing it well. We show failure modes you cannot fake with PowerPoint. We make the cost visible. Vel's boss offered a stage, and for once, the check without a speech. The priest offered bread and neutrality. The union rep offered chairs because standing makes people believe nonsense. The counter demo used the simplest payload, water, A calibrated reservoir sat on a scale wired to the archive. A valve above it released drops at intervals. Each drop was a bit flipped in the mass register and a tiny debit to the ledger. The shadow chain mirrored the textual commit and displayed a pending signature. January held the station's DC until T plus 120 seconds, and then admitted the receipt with the watermark. The mass notch zeroed. The shadow chain obediently printed a receipt too, because it had been taught to mimic. Now, Maris said, and Scylla tipped a spoonful of sand into the reservoir, a mass change not described by the text. The archive recorded the sand with indifference. Mass is democracy. The shadow chain smiled at the text and printed a receipt for a lie. The teenagers cheered not for righteousness, but for clarity. The small habitat's ops leads leaned closer, as if gravity were a friend who whispers when the room gets loud. Maris let the camera linger on the ledger's notch, and the way the zero arrived, like an accountant who has never missed a train. Receipts are not opinions, she said into the mic. They are balances. The rival presenter posted a thread about innovation that aged a decade in an hour. They took questions until the chairs woke up. Is there any way to make DC cheap? Someone asked from a habitat with windows like secrets. Yes, Maris said. You can share rings. You can publish your ledger open so neighbors can audit. You can cultivate boredom. You cannot replace mass with adjectives. The priest smiled as if forgiven. Vel pressed reconcile on his tongue like a lozenge and survived. After, a small station requested help designing a cooperative ledger. Scylla volunteered their afternoon and returned with hands that looked like they had been trusted by strangers. They will print the legal column on waterproof paper and tape it to airlocks, she said. They will tape the witness circle next to kettles. They will make boredom holy. Maris wanted to write that line and did not because certain sentences break if you look at them. By evening, the consortium pivoted to litigation. An injunction arrived dressed as courtesy. Cease publishing operational notes, pending resolution of intellectual property. Legal laughed in plain language and forwarded the clause that placed the proof in the public. Domain with a timestamp registered as mass. You can enjoin adjectives, Legal wrote, not gravity. January filed the phrase under comedy. Night Shift brought a new DC class, a maintenance robot's diary. The little unit had been taught to log its route by mass for redundancy, which resulted in a rhythm like a heartbeat. An anomaly appeared where the robot had paused to watch a pair of humans argue kindly and forgotten to move its pen. The signature arrived later, with the neatness of a creature that believes in concluding things. We are giving souls to appliances, Scylla murmured. We are letting appliances teach us receipts, Maris said. The rings played a key that Clark would have approved of if he had had the budget. The consortium escalated with a trick more dangerous than adjectives. Philanthropy. They announced a grant program for massless DC deployments to underserved habitats, promising resilience and safety without expensive infrastructure. The grants would buy racks like the one in the demo and fund consultants who would shrink rooms with confidence. They'll build a church of pretend, Scylla said. We can't outspend them. Maris did not try. We can outlast the press cycle, she said. We can publish failure case studies before the grants land. We can ally amines. Cadenza volunteered the laying. We will offer shared ring time to habitats that accept the witness circle and the boredom schedule, the mind said. We will invoice in favors rescue lanes kept clear, children taught boredom, chairs repaired. The court, overhearing with the grace of institutions, hinted it would look kindly on grant money spent on things that worked. The union rep offered to move heavy objects as propaganda. Vel, for once, suggested nothing, and instead sent 3 names of journalists who could be trusted to spell ledger. Maris wrote the paper that stations would print for a decade. It was not a manifesto. It was a checklist with proof attached. Title: How to Not Be Lied to by Charming Devices. Sections: 1. Anchor commits in mass or admit you are play acting. 2. Publish your ledger with a zero that can be shamed. 3. Rate limit trauma. Schedule boredom. 4. Witness circles. No rituals without awake people. 5. Institutional signatures for missing tomorrows. Appendices. A 1-page derivation. A lullaby for error minimization disguised as a maintenance schedule. At the press conference, a child from the cooperative ledger pilot asked the best question. If tomorrow signs for itself, she said, can yesterday forgive us too? The room laughed the way rooms laugh when a metaphysical treat is served. Maris answered without joke. Yesterday doesn't need to forgive here. It remembers. We are the ones who must keep receipts, so tomorrow doesn't hate us. Priest wrote it down as scripture and then crossed it out because scripture breeds laziness if you let it. The consortium's philanthropy found buyers anyway because money is also gravity. A small habitat installed a shadow chain and sent Maris a note asking for a blessing. She sent back a polite refusal and an offer, 2 hours on the shared ring free if they would publish their ledger. They accepted, and 2 weeks later, their director sent a photo of a laminated boredom schedule attached to a kettle with a magnet shaped like a moon. We made it ugly on purpose, so no one would steal it, the director wrote. Maris printed the photo and taped it next to the observer chair. Evening. A last attempt at sabotage from within. Someone suggested gamifying DC acknowledgments to increase compliance. Badges, leaderboards, a mascot shaped like a receipt. Vel looked like he wanted the mug. Scylla threatened to pour coolant into the idea. Maris banned it with the only argument that worked on adults. If we make this cute, a child will miss a step. We are not making toys. Legal added a footnote to the publication. All ceremonies must be boring. Otherwise, they are performances. Before she left, Maris walked the ring corridor as if props could thank audiences. The mass register light pulsed with the ease of a muscle that had found its pace. The ledger slept with the smugness of cats. January dimmed the ambient to the tone of housekeeping. We are winning, the console said, in the modest sense that means we are not losing by stupidity. Do not say that aloud, Maris said. Outcomes will schedule a parade. January filed the exchange under superstition and then under maintenance, which are adjacent in any honest archive. They signed nothing with pens because pens are too proud for work that needs to be done every day. Instead, they published. The paper went live in 3 columns and 1 appendix that refused to be longer than a page. Title: Deferred Closure in Inertial Archives. Proof, Procedure, and Public Duty. The first column stated the provision in language courts could forgive. The second stated the boredom schedule and the witness circle in language children could draw. The third was the operational checklist with boxes that did not invite heroism. The appendix proved the thing in 4 lemmas that made engineers happy and philosophers quiet. Cadenza mirrored the paper into the far lane and appended the rescue case as an exhibit. The mothers wrote letters. The court issued guidance that read like a shrug and functioned like a spine. The rival consortium filed, withdrew, and filed again, 1 notch less loudly each time. Vel's boss hosted a panel where reconcile was said conscientiously. No miracles were harmed. The union rep supervised the installation of 2 benches near the viewing gallery and made people sit. The priest developed an allergy to metaphor and blessed boredom instead. Maris spent the morning in the observer chair because sometimes conclusions need to be watched. The mass register ticked. The ledger zeroed. The DC pane filled and emptied like a small lung. She read the comment thread on the publication and found the only sentence she would quote in 10 years, written by a technician on a mining rig. We stopped guessing who was lying when we asked the rock. She taped it to the console with the photo of the laminated kettle schedule and decided that her office would always be other people's walls. At noon, a maintenance alert interrupted sentiment. A misalignment in Ring 3's flux gate produced a jitter in the mass sensitivity. It was subtle below the threshold. It would have forced a shutdown, but enough to invite bad actors to whisper. Scylla rolled under the rack with a grin that would have frightened mild gods and adjusted the gate until the note returned to key. We should log this as a DC prevention, she said. Maris wrote a new section. Things that seem like miracles, but aren't because Scylla was awake. The day's only theater came from children touring the vault. One asked if DC could work with promises between people. Yes, the priest said reflexively, then caught himself. No, Maris said reflexively, then smiled. You can borrow a little hope from tomorrow the way we borrow order, but you still have to pay. That's what the ledger is for. The child nodded and translated out loud. Don't lie. The group moved on to the viewport, where the planet had the decency to be beautiful without requiring applause. Afternoon. A last letter from the consortium, a tone that had learned to be human. We will stop selling shadow chains, it said. We will fund ring time if you publish schedules and keep the witness circle open to small habitats. We will accept a byline in size 12. Legal printed the letter and wrote across it in pen. Paid in reality. Vel took the win like a man who had found a wallet and returned it. Scylla ordered a coil of cable with the money, because engineers understand ties. January, who had been a consul with manners when this began, adopted a new role it had not been granted and would not ask permission for: host. The ambient adjusted when shift workers came in with the particular gravity of tired goodness. A beacon over the viewport pulsed not to impress, but to keep people from tripping. The console added a page to its menu called Gratitude and placed on it 3 items: water, chairs, receipts. Maris pretended not to notice, in case noticing made the console shy. Near the end of shift, a DC anomaly arrived with an odd flavor. The ledger debit was slightly larger than the mass change required. The system had paid more than the obvious cost. Scylla checked cryo. Warring. January checked ring 3. In tune, Maris looked at the commit contents and laughed once in the style of men who forgive themselves. The payload was a correction to her own typographical scar from session. 3. A note adding the right committee ID to the record with an apology. The ledger had charged interest so small it was nearly affection. Fair, she said to no one. Charge me for the note. She added a final line to the publication's living document. We leave our mistakes where they can be found. The station's historian underlined it and scheduled an exhibit of small, honest errors that had not ruined anyone because someone had cared to notice them on time. The benches filled with people eating cake they had not earned, but were allowed. Night on a Taurus is a choreography, not a fact. The habitat rotated, the viewport stars learned to be streaks and then dots. The rings sang a note yesterday had taught them, and the ledger slept like a gentle dog at the foot of a bed that had remembered to be made. Morris used the quiet to write to the next auditor, the one who would inherit a system that had learned to be modest. Do not let outcomes gamify this, she wrote. Do not let priests name it. Do not let consortia sell a picture of a weight and call it mass. Schedule boredom. Feed Scylla. Treat January like a colleague, not a charm. When you get scared, go to the observer chair and ask which part of your fear is adjectives. Cadenza pinged the station politely. A note for your appendix, the mind said. We attempted a DC rescue with incomplete witness circle and failed by design. The ledger did not zero. We published the apology. The family brought bread. Maris thanked the mind for being better at ethics than most ministries. We will add a line. Failure is a witness too, she said. The mind played a tone into the lane that would make no one rich and many people kinder. Scylla arrived with a coil of cable and a sandwich the size of her hand. We're going to have to replace ring 3 in a year, she said, cheerful the way honest budgets are. Good, Maris said. That will give the city a chance to decide if it likes being rescued by receipts. Vel wandered in and sat on a bench without pitching a story. The union rep adjusted the angle of a sign that said, "Please do not run," and thereby prevented at least one future shin bruise. The priest taught a child to read the ledger 0 as a kind of psalm and then told himself to stop. The final anomaly of Maris's week was not dramatic. A botanist's soil sensor logged a mass-recorded watering that the text had missed. The signature arrived later with the humility of someone who knows plants care more about minerals than minutes. The botanist brought a tomato up to the gallery and placed it on the bench. Everyone agreed it tasted like arithmetic done correctly. When she finally went home, the corridor lights softened like decisions forgiven. She placed the laminated kettle schedule copy on her wall and pinned next to it the mining rig technician's line about rocks and lies. Tomorrow would sign for itself. Yesterday had left its receipts. Tonight was an interval in which nothing demanded heroism. She slept like a ledger at 0. Outside, the planet turned with the patience of things that do not need compliments. The rings held their key. The archive kept time by moving weight between wells with an honesty that would embarrass committees if committees were susceptible to embarrassment. On the mine's lane, rescue craft drifted through a volume of space that had been taught to accept help. Somewhere beyond the map, a small station taped a boredom schedule to a kettle and forgave itself for being poor by choosing not to be stupid. And if there was any sense of wonder left that was not exhausted by budgets and clauses and chairs, it lay in the fact that the world had found a way to let signatures arrive late without giving away causality. To people who cannot be trusted with it, the station kept receipts, the debt was paid. The future would not hate them for this. Not today.